Okay, so good evening or good morning to everybody. We're very strict with our timekeeping here, so we're going to begin. My name is Clementine Delis, and I'd like to welcome you to the Metabolic Museum University, or MMU. It's, I guess you could call it a curatorial platform that focuses primarily on how to deploy different forms of visual thinking, different languages of visual thinking in order to interpret collections, mainly collections that have been forgotten or dormant, that are disputed, and to do this by placing them in different adjacencies to one another. And the objective is to heal, remediate, and re-signify their presence in today's worlds. So to take them out of the barriers of disciplinary divisions and discourses and bring them into a new kind of relationship to one another. That's what the MMU is about. So I encourage you to explore the website. It consists of an archive of past MMU projects, including concept notes, which is unusual, I guess, but I think it's important to also publish, if one can say that, the early reflections on a project. There's a library, there's a public forum, or what we have today, the debating chamber. And there are also two further areas. One is the reservoir, which contains field photographs of collections from all over the world. And then there are individual studios, or what we call bureaux d'esprit, offices of the mind, offices for visual thinking, that are workspaces which are only open for educational and research programs. So saying that, I'm very happy to welcome all the students from the Art University in Kassel who are also involved in the MMU. We have an excellent faculty, including Eddie Winani, Felipe Merez, Ollie George, Winnie Zhu, and of course, today's saboteurs, Toby Upson and Joanna Atemenge Owona. Our dedicated coordinators are also part of the faculty, Jacob Karpus and Christina Scheib, and Christina will moderate today's session. I can't go further without thanking Linus Kaufhold, who's behind the decks, making sure that all is going smoothly. And I'd like to thank Nicholas Brummer and KW Institute for Contemporary Art for enabling this series of debating chambers to take place. Okay, so this is our second debating chamber. It's in a series called Nerves, Breath, Muscles, Blood. And following our virtual launch of the website on October the 11th, our first debating chamber addressed the question of nerves, of risk and transgression in curatorial practice. And we had three provocations. The first one, very energetic, from Daphne Ayas, and her particular focus on lived justice, which was followed by the Vagabond Camp rereadings of transgression by Charles Tessou and Pierre-Alexandre Mathéos, with their respective museums of the slut machine and museums of accidents. You can watch all this you can watch the first debating chamber on our website, and you can read what they call, a beautiful term really, notes sauvages, or wild notes, under the project page, Skin in the Game. Okay, I must get some water. Today, we're going to address figureheads and emancipation, and this is a subject that connects very directly to the exhibition I curated at KW called Skin in the Game. It runs until January the 7th, so there's still a little bit of time to see it. And in this exhibition, 6 artists, Ruth Buchanan, Ottobong Nkanga, Collier Shaw, Rosemary Trockel, and Joël Tuerlinks, present the artworks that epitomize the moment when they threw their skin in the game and took their fate as artists in their own hands. And in the exhibition, and also in the conversations that will be published in the forthcoming book, Skin in the Game, they also reference their figureheads as art students between the 70s and 90s. Figurehead, Abba Sahedi was asking me, what does it mean? And we know that it used to be the term for a mast at the front of a ship. You know, the woman with the bosoms, if you like, that you smashed a champagne bottle against. But the question of a figurehead is not uninteresting when you think about how you step into art practice as a young emerging artist or curator. And very often the figureheads with respect to the artists I worked with in Skin in the Game, they were male. So for example, Carl André, Michael Asher for Joël Tuerlinks, but they weren't always male. So for example, with Ruth Buchanan, you have not only the works clearly of Rosemary Trockel and Katarina Grosse, but you also have artists from Aotearoa, New Zealand, such as the brilliant Jacqueline Fraser and Lillian Budd, or rather et al., who were both seminal to Buchanan's emergence as an artist. So while preparing this exhibition, I kept wondering about today's figureheads and whether the role of the artist has changed so much that an individual position, even the idea of the influence of a single artist, is somehow seen as a little bit distasteful, even retrograde, even market-oriented, unless they're dead. And I think that curatorially, we're seeing a lot of exhibitions of dead artists these days. I take KW, where I'm Associate Curator, and I think of Martin Wong, Michel Mayerus, Hervé Guibert, to name but three that were recently exhibited at KW. And so perhaps allegiances and references for emerging artists are forged today through maybe something different, maybe not a figurehead, but a collective identity, a movement, an alliance. And if there is a figurehead, then it's somebody or some group within one's own generation. It's a referentiality that immediately makes it possible to recognize where one is operating from and what one's stance is. Emancipation is a very nicely retrograde word. And it's closely tied to another retrograde word, I guess, which is experiment and experience. Empiricism. And I guess emancipation has to do with gambling one's life away as an artist and entering both heaven and Hades at the same time. And for the great Jacques Rancière, emancipation is fundamentally the will to learn. It's the heart of teaching and of any open-ended inquiry. And it positions itself quite clearly against the myth of pedagogy, with all its explanatory tropes and prostheses. But emancipation, let me tell you, is no nirvana. It also needs the institution. It needs the corset of the law to differentiate itself, to become that aesthetic experience, in the words of the German philosopher Christoph Menke. And tonight, without any further ado, we're going to hear 3 7-minute provocations on the question of figureheads and emancipation. 2 given by artists Annika Larsen and Abbas Zahidi, and 1 by curator Juliette Desorgues. And here you can notice the first step in emancipation. It's in that disengagement from the reductive terminologies that seek to define what we do in art practice. So I look forward to this debate. I'm excited. And I also look forward to the 2 saboteurs, both faculty members of the MMU, Joanna Owener and Toby Upson. And I shall now hand over to our moderator for the evening, Christina Scheib, and wish you an exciting, passionate debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much for this lovely introduction, Clementine. It is my pleasure to moderate our debating chamber tonight. And just before we get started, I briefly want to give you a heads up kind of about our housekeeping rules, so to say. So as you may have noticed, this event will be recorded and you can rewatch it later on our MMU website. I kindly want to ask everyone to keep your microphones muted unless you want to speak. When you want to enter the debate, you can use this hand sign. It's just at the bottom of your Zoom window, and I will then call you in. In case I don't notice you, just jump in and speak up. It will be more lively and dynamic that way. As a moderator, I will also be the timekeeper, which is more relevant for our provocateurs and saboteurs today. Other than that, as we are coming together digitally, we want to invite everyone to encourage you to show your expressions very enthusiastically. So if you agree or if you don't agree with something that is being said, nod your head, shake your head, make it a bit more active and visible for everybody on their screens. I guess that's it. So now let's welcome our three provocateurs, and I want to ask the three of you to briefly introduce yourselves. So Annika, Juliette, and Abbas, you get the spotlight.
Hello. Hi. So I can start. So I'm Annika Larsson. I'm an artist. I'm based in Berlin. And I mainly work with moving image, but also with performance. And I also have the last 5 years been leading a artistic research project called Non-Knowledge, Laughter, and the Moving Image. Yeah.
Hello, everyone. My name is Juliette Desorgues. I'm an independent curator based in Paris. I previously worked in different institutions as a curator, namely the ICA in London and MOSTYN in Wales.
Hi, my name is Abbas Zahedi. I'm an artist. I live and work in London. I guess I work in a kind of contemporary fashion with installation, performance, sound. And my work is kind of at the intersection of like philosophy, art, and social practice. And yeah, I'm always thinking about kind of different conversations and ideas, mainly to do around kind of personal and collective histories and experiences. So yeah, it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for the introductions. Now we can get started. Annika is up for her first provocation, and I will just start the time whenever you're installed with the screen share and good to go.
Okay. Yeah, so this is my provocation, and I'm actually, I started with this picture, Headless, by André Masson, that was also illustrations for Bataille's magazine, Acéphale, as a sort of gesture towards the head, the figureheads, as maybe also an authoritarian.
I'm sorry to I'm just going to interrupt you quite briefly. Could you just move away this one participant bar? It is maybe.
Okay.
Video
Yes.
bar.
Yes. Is it better like this?
Yeah, perfect. Thank you very much. Yeah.
But actually, I'm not going to talk so much. We can return to this because I thought I actually going to show you a montage that I did of some of my figureheads, and it could also be read as maybe my voice through other voices as I moved to Berlin 23 years ago. So let me just try to share you this film. Wait.
Hallo, ich bin Judith Leck. Mein Tanzpartner Tran und ich waren so glücklich, uns gleich an unserem ersten Tag in Berlin in die Hamburger Königin zu verlaufen. Es war fast wie zu Hause. Wir waren nach Berlin gekommen, um in einer großen Diskothek unsere erotische Trapezshow vorzuführen. Berühmt werden. Aber zuerst suchten wir ein Zimmer. Das Glück war mit uns. I want to ask a very quiet question to Norman. Norman, it is true that women find, with the best of will, the way you talk to them patronizing. And one of the things is your use of the word lady. When you, and this is what I want to ask Diana. When you said, Diana Trilling, foremost lady literary critic, if I were Diana, I wouldn't like to be introduced that way, and I would like to know how Diana feels about it. I don't like being called a lady writer, Norman. I know it seems like gallantry to you, but it doesn't feel right to us.
I could have called Diana a woman critic or a female critic. I could not call her a critic. I could not, or I could have called her a critic. But I wish to say that she was the best in kind. Now, and anyway, as you all should have known, if you had had the wit, I was doing it precisely to put Diana on.
Io e te, moglie, siamo alleati. Tu madre padre, io padre madre. La tenerezza e la durezza sono intorno a nostro figlio da tutte le parti. La Germania di Bonn, accidenti, non è mica la Germania di Hitler. Si fabbricano lane, formaggi, birre e bottoni. Quella dei cannoni.
Could you give us some of your political beliefs?
Kill everyone now. Condone first-degree murder. Advocate cannibalism. Eat shit. Filth are my politics. Filth is my life. Take whatever you like.
Bloody piss. You do it. That's what I told you to begin with. I'm trying to make a movie, and right. You do it. It's your story. You do it. Has to be done. We should have done it. Really. Agnes, I'll try. All right? Oh, yes, sorry. Really. No, really. I mean, I'm sorry, you're right. Okay. I'll try. Yeah. I don't promise, but let me give it a try. I'm so embarrassed by the whole thing. Well, you know, we can't stop the movie because you have problems of it's not problem. Yeah, it's vanity. No, it's vanity. It's all that kind of shit. Look, here they are. Here they are, right? Hello?
Ich bin aus Kalifornien, richtig konservativ erzogen. Meine Familie ist sehr religiös, Protestanten. Rauchen verboten, tanzen verboten, trinken verboten, Make-up verboten, Verbot, Verbot, Verbot.
So, ich muss jetzt gehen. Macht's gut, meine Freunde.
Ja, aber deine...
Sklavin. Ach, nichts weiter. Wenn es euch stört, schickt sie nach Hause.
Ja, ich kann mir nicht helfen. Das ist doch Faschismus.
Aber ja, meine Liebe, der Faschismus wird siegen.
Was?
Mhm. Dabei mag er gar nicht so Unrecht haben.
Wow, thank you very much, Annika, for this.
Yeah. So yeah, I guess we can also return. I think my 7 minutes are up, right?
They are off. I mean, we can
Yeah.
just briefly have a look at your bureau still, Robert. Thank you very much for sharing your first provocation. And we continue right away with the next one by Juliette. So take a moment to install yourself.
Okay, can you hear me and see the screen okay?
Yes, looks good.
That's great. Okay, so when considering today's theme of figureheads versus emancipation, I kind of want to think about it as a kind of much more diffused relationship. I don't think these terms are necessarily oppositional. I also don't think that they're kind of fixed in time, as in, historically this is, artists were looking at figureheads, and today this is kind of more diffused or collective way of working. I think it's actually a much more complex relationship. And when thinking about today's event, I wanted to turn the title on its head and use breath as a kind of starting point to think through these ideas. So the idea of breath is this this sense of like inhaling your surroundings, inhaling collective narratives, and exhaling your own singularity out into the world. And here we have an image of a breathing apparatus that consists of different elements, 2 lungs, which in themselves contain a multitude of valves that spread out and intermingle. So this is kind of like a first kind of initial thought I had when thinking about this theme today. And I wanted to use breath also as kind of this interlinked, as language interlinked with this idea of breath as a starting point. Language is something that I am and have been for a while particularly interested in, particularly artist writing and artist publishing within queer and feminist discourse and art history. And it's something that I think historically and especially today artists are using as a way of creating also collective reimaginings in a way in the face of socioeconomic and political pressures that of their given time. And so what I'm going to show here are different historical moments, but also artists that I've researched and worked with and collaborated with. So to start, this is, I guess, a kind of map of my research when thinking about today's event. The Bureau d'Esprit, which kind of runs through the theme of these different talks, which was started in the 18th century in Paris, in the model of the salon. And this is a kind of the most popular or well-known one at the time in the mid-18th century during the Enlightenment, that would gather led by Le Salon Madame Geoffrin, but would include different artists, writers of the time and different generations. Below is Natalie Clifford Barney, who is again an American figure in Paris, who set up a salon in her own household that became inviting artists and writers in Paris of the time, the late 19th and early 20th century. And it really became a real center point for queer life in Paris and within Europe. So this idea that language here becomes a kind of tool for both individual and collective emancipation that also bypasses this idea of the figurehead led by these two women. An artist that I've worked with a lot and continue to work with, Jacqueline de Jong, an artist and member of the Situationist International, who in the mid-60s, broke away from the Situationists, particularly Guy Debord, with whom she had a fracture, and set up her own kind of understanding of the Situationist International's ideas, and set up this magazine, this journal called the Situationist Times, which was published between 62 and 67, and included a whole, she would invite a whole generation, both historical and old and more and contemporary writers and artists, and would explore her own artistic and theoretical ideas through this magazine. And this is Jacqueline in Paris in the 60s with the magazines themselves. And then I wanted to look at these different manifestos, feminist manifestos, a manifesto being this kind of essential, I suppose, vehicle for feminist thinking by artists. So here on the left, we have Fight Censorship Group Manifesto from 1973, which was penned by different generations of artists, Louise Bourgeois, Anita Steckel, Joan Semmel, and Judith Bernstein. And it was a call towards the kind of emancipation of sexually explicit art made by women within the cultural public sphere. Similarly, slightly later in 89, the post-porn, so I'm going to zoom in a little bit so you can actually see what's written here, which called for again, similarly, this for a kind of sex-positive approach to art, and it was penned by Veronica Vera, but then was also co-signed by other artists, especially Annie Sprinkle. And I wanted to then look at this particular manifesto written by Reba Mabry, a contemporary artist, writer, and political dominatrix. And this is her own manifesto, How to be a Political Dominatrix. And I think that's very much in line with these two historical ones, very much follows through from these kinds of types of of artists, sex-positive artists, but also in the way that the text is written. And follows on from this kind of historical tradition. And then I wanted to come to Young Girl Reading Group, a collective nomadic literary project set up in 2013 by Dorothea Gerweder and Iglik Hulberkeit, which uses the spoken and written word as a kind of vehicle to think through queer and feminist theories. And in their writing, which they use as a manifesto, but then also the manifesto itself and other writings they use in their reading group performances and films, they use different figure references written by different figureheads, such as Preciado, Foucault, which they kind of collage and amalgamate together to create their own manifesto. So it's this idea that these figureheads kind of, I guess, their writings kind of dissolve and become, through their own writing, become their own voice. And I just wanted to show an extract of this manifesto that they used in one of their films.
Emphasizing the relationship of the body of text and the collective body. The vulnerable hyperbody is anyways composed not only of particles and molecules that circulate within, but prefaces, dedications, citations, appendices, illustrations, references, notes, diagrams, posts, and comments, and also thoughts traveling in reverse.
And then moving on, I wanted to another kind of particular interest in mine, and I also worked particularly with Northwest Press in the past, but yeah, artist radios, artist-run collective radios. So Northwest Press Radio, which was initiated by a collective of artists who each have their own individual practice alongside this project, such as Fanny St. Clark, for instance, and who set up this platform for younger and more contemporary artists across the world. Radio Al-Hara, which was set up in 2020 in Bethlehem, who have been doing, supporting Palestinian artists and voices, and still doing really important work currently in these horrific times. And I just wanted to finish off with this idea of curating as publishing, thinking about the idea of the anthology or even the palimpsest. So this idea of, and here is an image of a palimpsest from Armenia in the 9th and 10th century. So this idea where multiple voices, both existing, old and new, can exist on the same page, and through dissonance and perhaps resonance or harmony, but still exist and create their own singularity.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your provocation. And we will no comments yet. We wait for the saboteurs first. But now our third provocateur for the night, Abbas, you're up. You have the most professional microphone.
Can you hear me?
We hear you perfectly.
Amazing. All right, I'm just gonna share this. Okay, so I have 7 minutes.
Yep.
Yeah, I'm going to just go through this and then afterwards answer questions. So I might go a bit quick, but happy to engage in any clarifications afterwards. So when it comes to the question of figureheads, I think a lot like my work, I would be considered more of an iconoclast. I don't necessarily believe in the logic of representation that is very much rooted in this idea. And what I understand by the premise of this debate is a discussion to do with how we develop a sense of agency in artistic practice and then extend that beyond the scope of the individuals involved. I would even go further to say that the underlying premise of any artistic practice is a call to agency and the sense of self-determination. So that's born out of a shared sense of care and consideration. So I don't focus on the who, what, and why of art history, but more so the processes and practices that enable this sense of agency to be passed on to more and more people going forward, expanding the fold, so to speak. And yet I find it deeply saddening and somewhat ironic that I can't speak on certain issues unfolding in the current moment because I still don't have the kind of agency that I wish to pass on. There's no figureheads who can help me in the kind of situations that we're facing today. And so figureheads as such have become these kind of anachronistic cultural bastions, a sort of lighthouse or beacon erected to signal a sense of safety and familiarity for those who have the means to reify such figures as part of overarching grand narratives or a drive towards historical determinacy. In my case, there was no lighthouse. So I've spent most of my life engaged in a search party, peer-to-peer activities. So, you know, some of you know I spent more than 7 years organizing weekly philosophy symposiums in my local fish and chip shop here in West London. And we would sit and speak in a public space, have open discussions, anyone could walk in. And I remember one night there were Condoleezza Rice's cousin actually came to the chip shop and we had a full discussion about the illegal wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, and so on. And we disagreed vehemently, but it was very amicable at the same time. And now I find myself here on a platform within arts institutions, speaking as a kind of figurehead myself. And I don't feel like I can really speak freely, you know. There's lots of things that can't be said in this situation, and so I'm quite curious how that process comes about, even though we're in a time when there is much more diversity in the arts. And I would say that partly to blame is this diversifying process, the way that it's been managed to expand the number of figureheads in a way that has kind of neutralized expressions of genuine otherness and difference. Professor Sarat Maharaj describes this as a kind of intensifying crisis around the management of difference. And he kind of gives this example of a Cartesian grid as a plane of tolerance that kind of flattens the way that references can be made. So there is a risk that even in art, there can be this kind of self-referential drive that seeks to transform the foreign into the familiar through the use of figureheads that emerge through grand narratives and biennales intertwined with the control of economic flows within commercial art contexts and also publications. You know, things like Art Forum, for example, they've been in the news recently. And they also reviewed my show last year in New York at Anonymous Gallery, and the writer Kaleem Hawa took on the role of a critical figurehead. I'd never heard of them, so I looked them up on Twitter, and their bio just said a Palestinian writer and activist. And Kaleem had a very interesting take on my show in which he accepted my own figurehead credentials as a working class artist with social activist roots that and had these qualms with me that this didn't translate into enough anger in the work. And that they were also critical of why I accepted the Frieze Artist Award in 2022. So subsequent to this, I spoke to my therapist and also with my psychodynamic support group, who are all important figureheads in my life and have been for many years. And I asked them, why is it so hard for me to be angry in a space where I experience a lot of social and professional vulnerability? And some of them said it's because I'm a coward, and others then tried to empathize with my position. I then explained to them that in the dominant version of art history that still operates today along this kind of vertical axis, there is this kind of logic of representation and figureheads that allows us to plot other points in terms of their deviation from whatever is considered to be the normative central axis. So you can have kind of like, I don't know, queer expressionism or feminist conceptualism or et cetera, but it's always this kind of self-referential drive. And this kind of teleological, Eurocentric, progressive grid frames the whole history of art, much like a computer game, where the conceptualists, i.e. people like Duchamp, are the final boss. And after that, everything becomes contemporary, and that's apparently where we're at today. And this made me curious because there's a scene from Adam Curtis's documentary Bitter Lake, in which at the end of the Afghan war, the British Council are going in there and they're showing young Afghans about Marcel Duchamp and the Fountain. They're teaching them about contemporary art and Western culture. And so they're kind of showing Marcel Duchamp as the pinnacle of the civilized side of this conflict, and that young Afghans need to imbibe this kind of stuff in order to make themselves contemporary. And that's a bit like what I was trying to do in art school, and that's where I started playing computer games again. And I came across this game called Tekken, which I knew from a long time ago. And there's a similar narrative in this game to art history. There's lots of men, few women, and they're all trying to fight to get this guy called Heihachi. And you see his big head in the back. He's like the Marcel Duchamp of Tekken. And this particular image is from 1996. And all the subsequent Tekken games, they have the same storyline. They just have a lot more characters. And what you end up with is a kind of image like this in the current version. And this to me looks a lot like a kind of art world biennale. And it's definitely more diverse, but does it really generate anything other than lateral deviation from a central axis? And it's just like making a kind of higher resolution image with more pixels, but it's the same picture. And it gets so big, it might eventually crash our computers. We can't even look at it anymore. So this kind of expansion based on logics of representation, figureheads, still maintains this Cartesian grid logic with Duchamp and Heihachi at the top and center respectively. And so for me, this kind of reliance on figureheads in the art world made me wonder, maybe I should have to switch terrains, like go into a different mode of activity as an artist or someone working in visual culture. And you know, there's this idea that maybe we all need to become influencers, which is the kind of dominant form of being a figurehead today. And there's a long tradition of this in art as well. So there's this image of Holbein the Younger's ambassadors standing in what looks like a sponsored advertisement for exotic ethnic products and colonial goods. And so nowadays you can kind of switch out the ambassadors. They can be different people. They can even be institutions. And instead of a Persian rug in the center, you can have an artist of Iranian descent like myself speaking about figureheads and this kind of stuff. But I mean, I don't really know how or who kind of can maneuver beyond this. But what I do know is that we no longer have a situation that I think can be called contemporary art. What I think we have is this kind of computer game simulation that I refer to as art plus. And I think this reliance on kind of the methodologies that are employed within kind of the way that art functions today, it just creates this kind of procedural system that's born out of this drive that Sarat Maharaj describes as a way of managing an acceptable level of difference. And this functions through the formula of addition to add new figureheads whilst maintaining the underlying structures and modes of production. And this is art plus. So I'm kind of not really for this idea of figureheads. I think that there needs to be other ways of operating, and that's what I'm interested in. So yeah.
Thank you very much, Abbas. Wow. I would say yes, a round of applause for the 3 provocations we just heard. I can applaud with the mic on. And now I'm very curious to hear from our 2 saboteurs what their statements and responses are. We are going to begin with Joanna.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Joanna. And I am an art student in my master's currently at the University of Vienna, Hamburg. Just for some context, I want to thank the saboteurs I'm very intrigued. That was fantastic. So I'm looking forward to the public debate. But yeah, I'm going to start my sabotage. So I want to focus on the question of collective and social movements taking the role of a figurehead in cultural and artistic production. So in that context, I want to try and rethink what a figurehead is. Like, does it have to be an individual, or what does this mean that these social movements are taking over, or that there's like kind of a resurgence taking place? So kind of starting with who shapes artistic production and its impact on societal narratives. Like the questioning of established canons is more than ever something that is happening through collectives and movements, and at the center of emergent artistic practice, there's of course also the art university. So when I look at my immediate surroundings, not just my uni, but also other universities, I can see that there's a big focus happening on social movements being incorporated in the practice. So this just some examples that I'm going to give, like decolonizing the art university and their syllabus and knowledge production, or questions around the colonial gaze and dismantling it, the ramifications of human-made climate change, inquiries on identity and belonging, queer and gender studies, disability studies. So the list goes on. But like a substantial amount of my fellow students understand their practice as underpinned and just as informed by such sentiments. And there's so many student groups forming on collectives like critical diversity, intersectional and feminist queer subjects, and centering the invisibility of labor and many more. So this kind of presupposes that the assumption that these movements are set figureheads in their own right right now. So the form in which art is produced also connects more and more to a collective and communal in and output in the university, rather than an individual endeavor. And I think, this is also maybe interesting in connection to the younger reading group that Juliette mentioned, as focusing on queer and feminist theory in a collaborative approach within their extended community. And the idea that artworks are also maybe for a common good, or have like collective moment is having a return. So my question is kind of, do we need greater nuance if we think about a figurehead? And what is the goal of finding our figureheads as art students or young artists? What do we need from them? If the intention is emancipation and regarding communal social production informed by these movements that deal with social change, then what we look for in a figurehead is an orientation of what we want to base our output on. So stemming from personal notions that grow into a collective and communal. So then are our figureheads also the very people affected by systemic and racist discriminatory affiliations, for example, working as counselors, maybe the people affected by a system based on ableism, trying to forge a renewal of the system as social workers, or people creating safer spaces in queer communities, in nightclubs, maybe as nurses, or people affected by colonization historically and in the present, and then regarding, for example, ownership of land and gentrification, working as immigrant rights advocates. So if the role of a figurehead is someone, and now I'm calling this someone a movement or a community, who influences how we make art and how we engage in cultural production, then do we need to solely focus on more or less academic figures, or, which I think connects a lot to Abbas' provocation, maybe this suggests that figureheads may be found in our immediate communities and don't have to be some sort of an icon, but rather a group maybe. And if we think through what it means to intentionally orient our production on these perspectives and realities, to make a tangible example that is also a bit personal. For example, a figurehead then is a parent or another figure as a migrant, and their struggle with disproportionate distribution of labor, or having to function within a system that produces low-paid work, bureaucratic hurdles, housing issues, etc. So if these are the figures for whom this critical argument that we are engaging in is for or surrounding, then this is a figurehead, right? So yeah, I just wanted to give like a tangible example, but I think people can, like, you can keep this kind of thought process on for yourself. So like what you connect with that. And I'm gonna finish quickly by throwing some questions to the provocateurs, but also to the public debate. For example, what if the figurehead as an individual icon gave way to collective work? Or I'm going to be very banal for a moment, to the war against the system. And also, for example, when with your presentation, Juliette, I was very intrigued by your mentioning of the Porn Monolith Manifesto and this figure of the political dominatrix. So of course, these two things don't exclude each other. There's of course a connection happening. So I would be very interested in what you think. And then also, should we as art students nowadays even try to become part of this food chain, the Nahrungskette, that celebrates this academic discourse and their icons maybe more than the social movements they are based on? Referring back to Abbas, are we still questioning and re-questioning a canon that moves around itself? I'm also very interested, Abbas, in when you touched upon the point of art history and the canon that is repeating itself. I just want to throw in the thought of this massive content being produced right now around decolonized art history, and if, regarding your argument, does this change anything? Does this or is this still does this still mean we are still talking about this art history? So even the interrogation of the power dynamics within this art history, don't take influence on that. And then also going back to the university, must the faculty of universities reflect this, including a moment of community? Should the emblematic artist, professor, mentor stay in this position? And I would be very interested in what you think, Annika, as having had a very long-lasting professorship at the HFBK. How do you see this role of the professor and their relation to mentorship, a mentorship position for students who maybe even then strive to model their career after this one figure? And should we maybe think to replace this professor position to some extent in favor of groups that provide care and support and assistance to their communities, like counselors, nurses, and social workers, environmental organizers, or immigrant right advocates, as I mentioned before?
Thank you, Joanna, for your Sabotage and for bringing in these questions. There will be a moment to reply for everyone, but before we are entering the debate, Toby, we want to hear your Sabotage. There you are.
Here I am. Can everyone hear me okay? That says yes. I'd like to echo, first of all, Joanna's sentiment and sort of thank the three provokers for their positions. I think for me, there was something interesting or a common affinity emerging between each of your positions, where there's this notion of something I would call a singular pluralism or a singular plural emerging, where a collectivity of practices and practices at large are sort of congealing into an ideology that someone embraces. So that can be a personal or sort of a social drive that someone or group of people can hook onto. So that's interesting, thinking about the figurehead as a singular plural. My sabotage, I'll be very boring, sorry, I've got a little text I'm going to read. Yeah, we can have a chat about it afterwards, maybe. So a friend of mine once described the art world as a religion. Personally, as someone wholly bound to the ideology of this creative microcosm, this likening feels pointed, relevant, something to bear in mind. As a writer, I'm approaching this sabotage from an archetypal position. It's a tentative and loose sketched position, one that I've not spent enough time with, but here I hope we can suggest something for us to consider. I would like to start with 2 quotes. The first, a title, riff, and chorus line, is a quote I'd like to hold metaphorically. As with that, likening my friend made in mind. The second quote, coming from a novelistic source, is something I would like to treat more indicative of the point I'm making, something I would like to reflect back to our speakers later. Quote 1, "No church in the wild." That's Jay-Z, Kanye West, featuring Frank Ocean and The Dream. Quote 2, "Too much light will blind you, and too much water will drown you. It's a danger to accept anything real from another person. To know something of them, a person has to be careful about the voices they listen to, the faces they let themselves see." That's Catherine Lacey. And to refrain, there's no church in the wild. Etymologically speaking, a figurehead is an ornament on the projecting part of a ship. A latter sense of the word also alludes to a leader without real authority. In an ironic way, figureheads are headless, plain symbolic. Emancipation has a Latin root. Here it means to capture from someone else's hand, and this sense has developed into a more contemporary meaning of an act of liberating a child from parental authority. So there's something enlightening about that. There's no church in the wild. Brought into conjunction as the focus of this debating chamber, we are perhaps looking to think through the symbolic forces that free artists from a parenthood or a parental hold, the place from which they have grown, their becoming. In this context, the notion of breath seems fitting. At once, an act of freeing the old, to breathe out. Again, it is also an act of the new, of breathing in. It is an act of gaining or maintaining life, and in-out, an act of validation, if you will. In the English usage, breath denotes an odor, a scent, a stink, as well as an exhalation. In itself, this sense of the term comes from a Proto-Germanic root meaning vapor or waft, and indeed exhalation. There's something corporeal about that outpouring. In our contemporaneous understanding of breath, and the one I'm going to think with here, there's something wholly sensorial about it. Breath is an odor, a scent, a stink, as well as a vital corporeal action, something that has, and which we do in the present. Breath presences us. There's no church in the wild. When we hold these 3 terms together, figureheads, emancipation, breath, I am left wondering about the very usefulness and indeed the risk of such symbolic guides cited by our previous speakers. There's no church in the wild. What is freedom and what is idolatry? Indeed, what is sin and how is this sin treated? Intoxicated by the blinding light of radically freeing figureheads, I worry that artists today are losing their own heads, unable to critically engage with the world outside of ideological holds established by quasi-biblical figures, be these individuals, institutions, or indeed social movements. Gripped by and gripping artistic emancipation, I worry that the idols in the church of the art world are rendering artists today unable to fully sense the world around them, and therefore unable to engage in a way that goes beyond the aestheticization of politics, and therefore unable to be present using their corporeal agency to critically position themselves within the flows of life. Are figureheads leaving artists unable to breathe? And over back to the floor.
Thank you very much, Toby, for this sabotage. And we see the provocateurs coming back on as well. And first of all, you get the chance to respond. Some questions were directed towards you. Also, you can comment on each other's provocations as well as on the sabotage. Is there anybody trying to?
Shall I make a start?
Yes, please.
I just wrote down just a few words from these two responses. Thank you so much for those, Joanna and Toby. Very interesting. Yeah, I mean, the idea of multiples, I think, is something that I think came up, or I love the term singular pluralism. I think certainly this idea of multiple figureheads that also outside of the art context, I think is a really interesting notion. Certainly for me also, my said figureheads have not necessarily been in the art world. I think we have to look at our personal community as well as our, beyond the kind of ramparts of the art world. I think, and I think also there's a need for that. I think there's a need for, particularly given the very complex political times that we're going through, and also the kind of crumbling also of like institutional frameworks, there is certainly a need to reinvent the wheel, right? To kind of look beyond, these kind of art canon figureheads that have been, we find in art history books. I mean, for me as a curator, I've kind of always had a very trans-historical approach. I certainly have figureheads in a kind of more art historical sense, but I also, I studied. Sorry. Did someone say something?
I think that was by mistake. I think.
Yeah. Continue, please.
But I think it's of course important to, move away from that and also, dismantle these kind of art historical canons. And that's something in the way that I work, I've always, created dialogue between contemporary practice and more historical figures.
We already have a question coming up from our public. So do you want to turn your video on and?
Hey, can you hear me at all? Okay. Yeah. I don't actually have a video on this computer, so unfortunately only Abbas and Toby are going to know what I look like. This is less a question and more kind of, I guess, a public
Would you tell us your name, please?
Yeah, sure. My name is Zish. I'm an artist. I have sort of been mentored by Abbas in kind of a very informal way. Anyway, so my sort of public provocation is sort of thinking through everyone's thoughts together. And so I was sort of thinking about what Toby said in terms of like the figurehead as something that kind of occurs in nature. So I'm thinking about how we as human beings are obviously going to relate to the world from our own point of views. And so being children ourselves, we're always going to look at our parental figureheads. So I think the notion of a figurehead is always going to be something that's somewhat natural to our perspective. And so I think from that, I was thinking, okay, well, what if it's not so much about the figurehead as an individual? The format is kind of maybe what we're rallying against or what we're trying to push against. And then I'm kind of struck by that thought of the peer-to-peer, obviously, Adam Farah, and this sort of notion of creating space for each other as artists, which I think kind of plays to what Joanna was saying, of like what are we actually going to do, or how is the figurehead stifling the new artist? Sorry, that was what Toby was saying, apologies. But I'm then sort of thinking about what the what the figurehead does. As Abbas was saying, the figurehead is iconoclast. And I'm thinking about the Chinese philosophy of Wu Wei, which is action through inaction, and the notion of just going left. And going left in the sense of Tekken or Street Fighter is essentially a defensive action. And it's something that means that we are just sitting in a space, taking up space. And I wonder if that is a way of undoing the notion of a versus or an A versus B. We're now actually together. So yeah, I just thought about intercommunal connections between figureheads as a way of creating space for new artists and essentially subverting the system. Yeah, I love it. And also I'm sort of thinking about the Turner 2019 as a real terms example of this.
When you say with Turner 2019, can you be a bit more specific?
Yeah, so I mean, in terms of that was the year that Taishani and they sort of subverted the notion of the Turner Prize in itself. And I think that kind of, it created a certain shift of the frame, I think, that then made them respond with the following year. So I think these forms of sabotage, subterfuge, and forms of resistance to what might be a zero-sum notion of scarcity within the society we live in is actually ultimately about, okay, well, we don't actually have scarcity. We have maybe a limited amount of time on this platform, but instead of fighting one another, we're actually just going to go left. We're going to act defensively and actually just take up this space, somewhat like an Occupy movement.
Yeah, thank you for that. This example. For the debate now, everyone, you're invited to turn on your cameras so we can actually see one another a bit more and get a bit of a feeling of being together in this. Just give you all a second to switch on. Perfect. It's good to see who's in. Hello. So, Toby, did you want to reply to this? Or I don't want to put you on the spot, but
I think it would be nice, Christina, if we could get some points from different people in the house, so to speak, rather than atomize on one particular question, and also allow the provocateurs to respond, perhaps, to each other, not just to the saboteurs. Maybe we can have, Linus, we could have a full view of everybody in the house. Would that be possible? Especially if you now turn on your cameras.
Everybody should just change the gallery view themselves, and then you'll see everyone.
Christina, do you want to go ahead with that?
Yeah, I see you. Yeah. So, Drew, Annika, Juliette, or Abbas, do you want to reply to one another's provocations? I thought there were a couple of similarities.
Yeah, maybe I can say something. Yeah, thank you all for the provocations, Abba and Juliette, and also Joanna and Toby for the sabotage. I think this polyphonic, the idea of singular plural has been occupying me a lot lately, or actually many years, of also maybe responding to Joanna's question about the role of the mentor, and of rather than seeking one voice or one dominant voice to kind of find the entanglement of voices, and how they kind of both, how can I say, that they I mean, also how they can work as counter voices and voices through different times. So not only think of how they also sometimes even counter themselves in different time spaces. But maybe what I wanted to say is also that maybe to return to my own provocation, that for me, I wanted to return to the beginning of my artistic practice because I didn't think I had figureheads back then, and also because of the lack of figureheads that I could identify with within the art dominant kind of art discourse that was very male and very straight when I studied. And but also maybe to return to the fact that when we speak about identity, that many of the art or films or persons that I looked at was male and gay, and it's also interesting how if we look at today's politics of identity politics, or who we can identify with, to kind of how can I say, I could recognize there both a lack of having actually visibility of people that I could identify with or could see that was actually present then, or that actually existed then but was in the shadow, was not spotlighted, but also maybe the possibility to through kind of the singular plural build figureheads that are fictive, that doesn't exist, or that exist in between artistic practices or philosophy, or that, and maybe that's something I'm after, that it's more about the relationship of things rather than actual persons, right? We have to kind of also, when we speak about figureheads, maybe it's also very much an imaginary thing, that there is something like a person and not a person in relation to society, to time, to other, right? So that's maybe just what I want to bring in.
Hi, thank you for everyone, the presentations and the various questions and comments. I forgot the question that Joanna asked me, so if you could remind me this, it would be helpful. Just like, and then I'll kind of continue my answer. Thank you.
I should just, yeah. I think the one you're referring to was asking about how you take a decolonized art history into this question of we repeating ourselves in an art historical canon, and if this doesn't have anything to do with your argument, because in the end it still centers on an art historical moment that again revolves around itself, maybe. So like if that changes anything, and like the questioning of power dynamics that is happening, and like a massive production of content within this decolonial art historical moment.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's difficult to really talk about decolonizing in an art space, because the practices of colonization are still occurring in the world today, and for me, this is so the priority for me is not really to think about how to decolonize art. Is more thinking about how like I came into art after training as a medic to be a doctor, doing many years of community work, activism, and then I come into art because
you've just muted yourself, Abbas.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, the for me coming into art from these different backgrounds of medicine and community organizing, it was more because I ran out of space to be active and sustain myself within the kind of concerns that I had. It wasn't necessarily because I felt like there was some need to come in and address some situation within an art context, or even to think so much about art history. I think for me, learning art history was more just trying to figure out who am I talking to when I'm over here, and I think the kind of figurehead that often doesn't get discussed in these contexts is one which Claire Barlow refers to as the fictitious audience. And the way that arts organizations, institutions, and people working in this space have this idea of who they are speaking to, and what are the interests of this audience, and what are they willing to see, and what are they willing not to see. And so there is this kind of again, this sort of like plane of tolerance that is created, which everything operates within. And I mean, most of the kind of conversations and concerns that I have are outside of an art context. But then I guess for me, like the idea of figureheads is trying to almost find currency, you know, like it's famously Wim Wenders made this statement that photography is dead. And now the only reason we take photographs is as a form of evidence, or to send a receipt so you can get your expenses paid. You know, that's why we take photographs. Like it's not an aesthetic thing anymore. It's just, or it's a way of like proving to the algorithms that you still exist. So you put selfies every day and often enough to show that, you know, in the metaverse you still have some cachet or currency. And I think figureheads are often used in this way in order to give currency and credence to what you are doing, which may not have anything to do with that person that you're referencing, but this is the currency of our industry, and so we have to exchange these kind of artifacts. And I think for me the most interesting work, like what Juliette was saying, is when you go outside of art spaces and you kind of try to intersect and interlock different groups. So you know, in my work, I've worked with doctors, medics, different kinds of social kind of institutions outside of the art world. And often I find that like programming things for a very specific audience or a very specific group of people that I'm concerned with at the time, that often has more of an impact in terms of broadening the conversation and making the institutional space feel more porous than trying to I don't know, like guess who is this fictitious audience and be in some sort of realistic dialogue with them. I don't think that's possible. And if these dialogues are possible elsewhere, then I would be very happy to conduct them elsewhere as well. But the space we are in is the one that allows for this level of kind of intellectual promiscuity, and that's what I'm interested in, I would say.
Yeah, thank you for this questioning I mean, in general, I think most of you were really questioning this notion of figureheads and what this could even be, and the forms of a figurehead taking on the role of like a relation that we create with one another in a community. Something that Joanna was referencing, I think, when she mentioned the social movements and communities, and challenging this notion of hierarchies between professor and student. I think this is going into this direction quite nicely.
Can I jump in here? I want to talk about isolation. I mean, everybody here has been presupposing in some ways that there is either a community or a reference or some sort of backdrop, even if it's a metaversal one, you know. And I think, Abbas, when you talk about the figurehead as an influencer, it's totally spot on. But I worry also about the condition of isolation and alienation that we've been living through. And I mean, I think everybody recognizes that as a post-COVID phenomenon. And this isolation of not going out, I mean, I highly respect this format. And I think the more we can be visible in it, the better. And I don't take this lightly, this Zoom, to try and restore the value of Zoom through this debating chamber. But I suffer from deep isolation. And I wonder how this isolation can be mapped onto how I talk to people I want to work with, or students, or how how we speak about isolation. And a figurehead can also be looked as an interlocutor, as somebody who is part of the dialogue within which we want to position ourselves. And that dialogue can be with somebody dead, alive, in the same town, very far away. It can be a body of work. It can be, but it can also be a deep, deep fear to engage with something in a time where there are so many figureheads and so many collectives. And, you know, even right now with the situation in which the world situation that we face today, you are hard done by if you don't align yourself to a position, a collective, a figurehead again. And so I just wanted to throw up this question of isolation, because it's certainly what I felt as a young art student. I did not feel that there were figureheads, much more like Annika. I was wondering who they would be. And I didn't find them with women artists, and I didn't find them with art history. Art history was the worst area that I could find a figurehead in. So I think there's an issue around figureheads and emancipation that can also be an attempt to connect, an attempt to find this interlocutor. Anyway, that's just my point. I see that Toby and Annika also want to respond.
Let's go in direction of hands raised. Annika, Toby, and then Jonas, please.
Yeah, thank you, Clementine. Yeah, I agree there, and I think also in one way the word figurehead is this leader, right? Has already hierarchical structure that is problematic, and of course, if we speak about polyphony dialogue, multiple, we speak more about isolation, we speak more about friendships, right? And to form relations and friendships between, which is something that I can also maybe feel that I have grown into my artistic practice, where I didn't have figureheads in the beginning, or had a stubbornness of refusing figureheads or references, but where friendships between me and dead writers or artists or thinkers has emerged as a sort of form of very fruitful dialogue, right? And it also maybe even feels hard to speak about them for me as figureheads, because I see them truly as some kind of friendship, of course, very fictitious ones, but still a much more healthy relation for me than to have this kind of admirational relationship.
Thank you. Toby, you want to?
Yeah, just thinking with Abbas and with Clementine, what you just said, I'm really interested in the notion of interdependency. And specifically, if we think this logic of isolation, how we can become isolated, how we become singular bodies, interchangeable game characters, as it were, to think with Abbas. And just thinking about how that process of individuation is wholly bound to not only this art world, but the more general Northwestern European world system, call it capitalism, call it colonialism, it's one and the same, and how that world system fundamentally effaces these layers of interdependency, not just the surface level relations between artist, museum, artist, gallery collector, but actually the sort of the really deep-seated interdependencies that exist between artist and the museum cleaner, for example. Like, the artist couldn't do a show in the museum if the cleaner wasn't there. And the current world construct we live through, this notion of museums, they occlude those levels of dependency. And I'm just interested in how you can rethink the figurehead as more of an ecology. So thinking what with Zish earlier when he was talking about ecologies and sort of these groups of influences that come together and sort of share agency to create a space and environment to live on and through. And I don't think that necessarily needs to be something big and spectacular. Thinking about the pandemic, I mean, one of the things that got me through the early days is your talk, Clementine, you did for KW, the conceptual intimacy, little like voice keynote you did. And that thinking of like, actually, you don't need a spectacular audience you don't need your thinking to be grand and public to the world. You can have far much more deep, meaningful, powerful and provocative conversations between two individuals. And that can be far more valuable, meaningful, life-giving than having a blockbuster exhibition that 2 million people see and earns blah, blah, blah pounds. I've gone off on a tangent, so I'm just going to shut up.
Thank you.
Okay, I think I will jump in now because my thoughts are racing, and I feel like I wanted to add something earlier. Now we have different points that came up, but I think two quick comments that I would want to share. First, I really like combining this like historical figure of an ambassador, and connecting it or putting it in relation with a sort of like influencer, because I think both figures always work within a backdrop of like commercial, aristocratic, political hierarchies. And I think, but also like another thought that came up to me that I would say is quite optimistic, because I do think that there's like a little bit of like that within the provocations that we had, I did have a sentiment of like some sort of pessimism, where I would argue that this essence of also using art as a sort of like activist stance, a little bit like you've been doing it, Abbas, is something that has only occurred within the last 100 years. So I do see a lot of potential of like maybe going away from like the sort of figurehead, or even from like this, also like just leading away from art just having like a singular reason or like a singular goal, and I guess we are, I think, in a time where we do witness not just like a plurality or multiplicity or diversity, but also I think the potentials of art have been stretched. And I think that's why we should maybe try and focus on these potentials and just like open up maybe even our positionalities. So seeing each other, being a researcher, being an artist, but also like a community figure, and connecting all of these spaces. I know it doesn't really directly answer any of the thoughts that you guys brought in, but I feel like this is some, as an art historian who's been working a lot with the canon and seeing how dire these situations and how exclusive certain structures have been, I do see a lot of potential and change, specifically in the role of like the artist becoming an activist and vice versa. That's just something that I wanted to like throw in, even though it sort of like goes into like another direction.
No, I think it's great to also point out the optimism in it and the potential that it can have. Clementine, did you want to add something?
Oh no, I would be very keen to hear what Luke Willis-Thompson has to say in this, and to thank him for waking up so early from the other side of the world in New Zealand. Come on, Luke, give us your thoughts, your early morning bird thoughts.
Kia ora katoa. Nice to see you all. Nice to see so many friends again. I'm really just thinking, I don't quite know which way to go. But I'll try to say something. I'm worried that we have this moral imperative that is probably for net positive, to always think about the communal and the collective, to always think about solidarities, to always think about a kind of movement. When we're provoked to think about figureheads, right? Or when we're supposed to think about power in general, we think immediately for that alternative view. And I totally understand that, but I think about my mother. I've been thinking about my mother this whole talk, who's kind of, she requires care. She's old, she's unwell in many metrics, but she's a person who never had a community and never wanted one and didn't want to work and tried community and tried to flee whiteness, I think, and tried to be outside of the world she was born and never really found that outside, or never found others in that outside, and really just wanted to look at the sky and cultivate her inner life and think about, in her case, some kind of God, right? That was her work. And when I think about my own organizing, right, I'm always challenged to think, how am I making space for that person too? But the person who is totally sovereign in choosing not to be a part of a collective, like that is an absolute right. And it does trouble that conception often of a collective or collectivity. It does trouble it because you realize, of course, there is a very deeply a fascistic element to it almost, right? If you're demanding a solidarity, you're placing an extreme burden on others, right? You are burdening others with your call to be with them. And this is a sort of odd level to take the discussion to, or an odd place. But I guess I'm trying to round up by saying, like, here we think about this idea called mana motuake, which is really a term only for Māori, but means, like, its translation would be collective self-determination. And it's in the UN Declaration of Indigenous Rights, and it's in the atmosphere. And I'm sure you've heard that phrase, collective self-determination. It's sort of a term that emerged out of Native communities globally. And I'm always thinking, like, well, how do we must think the self within collective self-determination, right? We can't let go of that. And I suppose what am I saying here? Artists are often these receivers for a completely different world of thinking, right? They're often, and I worry sometimes that that we're not allowing enough space for that, right? That there is something conservative about wanting to find something politically better, right? To always be demanding something politically better. I'm totally torn. On one hand, I agree with it, and we should destroy all figureheads and move away from that thinking and be utterly non-hierarchical. But then, like, what of the person from there who is an outsider and who needs to be? And how do we hold that as a right if we believe in rights? Yeah.
Thank you very much for sharing this perspective. Abbas, I'm wondering, do you have a response, or would you like to answer to this?
First of all, I'm very happy to be in dialogue with everyone and to hear from Luke. I'm always interested in what Luke is thinking, so it's always a pleasure. It's for me, this kind of I think that what it makes me think of is how the idea of in terms of how figureheads are often take the form of a kind of like a fetish. and how basically then, because I think the art world, in a way, for like the way I've experienced it and the way I understand kind of how difference and otherness kind of comes into the space, often seems to serve the fetishes of the same people who benefited from the colonial practices of kind of art historical eras in the past as well. So I kind of see that like the kinds of alterity or alternative modes of expression and self-identification and actualization often still kind of function within this kind of Lacanian sense of like a fetish, not necessarily just a sort of, a sexual one, but more so this idea of the fetish needing to put things in a particular place that enables a certain worldview to remain intact. And I think for me, this is what I struggle with, because it's very easy then to understand how to play that game, or how to present, how to kind of call for self-determination and agency within that kind of prism. But the sort of prism that Luke's talking about in relation to his mother, this sense of interiority and actually like learning to witness oneself, I don't think that level of freedom exists in this domain. And I think this also goes into the point Clementine was making in relation to feeling isolated. I don't think you're alone in this. I think many of us are feeling isolated, and that's because we only really seem to exist in these very public moments, and the way that we've learned to kind of censor ourselves and understand our value as this kind of visage of figurehead or artist or kind of person being part of this kind of milieu. It really erodes our sense of kind of having a private life or having a private space. The space of privacy is actually shrinking to the extent that it's very difficult to communicate in private, even because every communication is related back to this public mode of existence that seems to take primacy over the interior and the private. And so for me, like my main kind of space of sanctuary is, with people that I love, like my kin. Like I don't even consider there being a community as such, like people very close to me. And then at the same time, like I said, I'm in therapy. I've been in therapy 15 years. I have group therapy. Like I'm in those people that can witness me in my most kind of vulnerable and kind of tormented state. That's a level of kind of witnessing that I don't think is necessarily even possible in any other domain right now. I don't know how I would access that, because the level of insecurity and precarity that is existing on a wider social scale, which is amplified within a kind of art context, for artists, art workers, etc. There are all of us engaged in this. This insecurity that we feel makes it very hard to have any kind of emotional bandwidth to engage with those things in our lives. And so how do we create spaces which allow us to feel witnessed and to witness one another and to give that sense of interiority enough kind of room to expand? I don't know. And I have a feeling that this kind of constant demand to be visible and active and figurable in some sort of kind of fetishistic dynamic is really having a damaging experience to us on this very individual level.
Thank you very much for that response. I saw a lot of nodding in agreement, which was very nice. There are a couple of the students from Kassel online as well, and I'm wondering what you are thinking, what you're making of all of this, being kind of just started studying, not or about to graduate, but being in this moment of entering this art world, or choosing this maybe as a going to say this word, a career, whatever this is going to be and mean. What are your reactions? Can you share your thoughts with us, please?
Hey, I'm Dia. Yeah, I'm trying to understand everything. Yeah, I mean, I'm in the 3rd semester and I am studying in Kassel because sorry, I'm a little bit nervous now. Yeah, I'm studying in Kassel. I chose actually Kassel because I didn't want to be part of a big public. I wanted to be free and do my thing. And I also don't share so much on Instagram because I feel like, yeah, it does something with my art if people react on it. I'm trying, I think, to be radical in my work, and I'm trying to observe my surrounding and put it all in this art. Yeah, and sure, I wish that it can do something with people and people can see it. And yeah, but I have a problem definitely with where to show it, like, and how to show it, because I said it also to Clementine. I feel the rooms are too clean for me. They are too, I don't know for who they are, but I'm not doing it for these people. I feel like, yeah, I don't know. I will see in the next years how it will develop, but sometimes I would just like to put my work outside on the street, you know, and see what happens, and not arrange it and decorate it. Yeah, so yeah, this from my point of view of being a starter, maybe. But it's very interesting to listen to you and yeah, get ideas. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Gia, very much for sharing this. Also this feeling of, yeah, not really knowing what to do about the spaces that are being created. And I think with all I feel like so many questions came up regarding this position of figureheads and what it be, what it is, and that we're like, it's a bit like a ghost that is sort of haunting us, that we can't really get rid of completely. We might not even want to, but at the same time, it's not really sure how to move forward, how to move on with it. But now after,
I think I'm very curious to know if Kirsi Mikola, we have the honor of having Tiny on her telephone, has anything to say. Do you want to join the discussion, Kirsi? We can't hear you. Oh, it's difficult. No, we can't hear you. Are you muted? No worries.
We can unmute. I don't know. Maybe Linus can unmute you.
Yeah, now you're speaking.
Well, I would have a lot to say, but I sort of wonder sometimes, you know, this idea that I keep hearing about the big bad art history, the Western art history, and I just sort of think, live and let live, you know, somehow that, you know, I have like kind of like a lot of art books, and yes, unfortunately, a lot of those books are by, you know, maybe there's Matisse and so forth and so on. but I love their art, and I don't think it makes my life more miserable to be having these everlasting love affairs with these so-called figureheads of art. And so I ask myself, when I listen to all these people, like, who are these artists that they're all wanting to demote? I mean, who are they talking about? And I understand the problem, because I had the same problem, you know, female, and who are the female figureheads, and so forth and so on. But I think that the great thing about this current climate is that it gives us an opportunity to kind of fish in these waters quite freely. And I think that this idea of this so-called Western canon, it's already lost its kind of potency, to the point where we can just like listen to it like we listen to the Beatles, you know, and it's just great stuff, and it's there for everybody to enjoy. And I think that what's coming in the future does not need to be limited by this episode in the history of art. You know, there will be other things for sure, but it's not some kind of a state of permanence. And so it'll just continue, hopefully, existing in a nice way, without giving people too much of a headache about their identities. And maybe they'll just say, well, I'm really not that interested in painting and these people, because essentially this is the history of painting and sculpture. And it's just like in music, you know, you can listen to Bach or you can listen to Sly Stone. You know, I think that I would hope that in my lifetime we can move on from wanting to demote what certain pretty competent individuals have achieved, and just smell the roses and live in a sort of more forgiving inclusion, without having to feel like we're excluded because we have a different cultural background, or we're gay, or we're female, or, you know, what have you. That's basically my little provocation for the moment.
It's very provocative, Kirsi. It's provocative. I mean, I have to say a couple of things. First of all, I think that the reference to the fetish is excellent, because it so happens that I have to give a talk about a fetish in 2 days. And the more I think of fetish, the more I don't like it anymore. The idea of fetish is this kind of atomization into one thing, one, you know, if you like, to be anti-fetish is to be anti-classification. Yeah, classification is the ultimate fetishization of beings in the world, of things of agency, if you like. And I reckon that the discussion today has been a bit pulled down by this unpleasant word, which is the figurehead, which is, in a way, it's brilliantly replaced by influencer, it's replaced by fetish, and it still begs the question of how far our options lie to bring in these different dialogical interlocutors. I mean that very seriously, like to suggest that you never look at one scenario or one figurehead or one condition of resistance alone, that you always bring in something else to dislodge any form of atomization or monocultural understanding of what a reference is, or what a discourse is, or a discipline, or an art historical reference. And I remember maybe 15 years ago thinking, would it be possible for the Städelschule in Frankfurt to invite a Nigerian art historian or a Nigerian thinker And what would happen if the students had to spend 1 year not learning about art historical discourse or art theoretical discourse from a well-known German philosopher and publisher, but somebody who came from had a different breadth, a different horizon? What would that do? Would that be accepted? Today, I think it would be accepted, but I don't think it would have been accepted 15 years ago. I think to try and reflect the student body today in different places in the world where you don't have a national identity based on, you're not going to become a Scottish student because you study in Edinburgh, right? That option today to try and reflect the heterogeneity of references, of referentiality, that's incredibly important. But it doesn't make it easier. It sort of propagates. And that propagation of referentiality is exactly what we need in order to produce a kind of iconoclasm that Abbas supports and that I support totally. I don't want any disciplinary borders to tell me what the classification is of this particular art form or that particular art form. So I think the exercises that we need to go through to understand what the figurehead could be are exercises that have to be intensely dialogical, so that we never think of one figurehead in and of itself. So that was my little rant in response to Kirsi. How are we doing for time, Christina? We haven't got much time left. So.
We don't have so much time left, and I also feel like a little bit you kind of made the closing statement. But also, Annika, you had your hand up, and if somebody wants to get.
No, but we skip my comment. I think that Clementine added a few things that I was also aiming to. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think this exactly the notion of never looking at the figurehead alone, but always in relations. And I think also this is something that all of your provocations, as well as the Sabotage, showed quite nicely, how in the bureaus, as these spaces for visual thinking, these things are coming together and can be next to one another. And I just noticed there's something coming. Yeah, just for information again, so the video here has been recorded and we will upload it into the MMU website shortly. And I would take this to thank you, everyone. Thank everyone again for joining the debate, for preparing this beautiful provocations, preparing the beautiful sabotages. Big round of applause for all of you. And we are having our third online debating chamber in 3 weeks' time, I believe. There, thank you, Linus, for helping me. On the 22nd of November, it's called Muscles, Collections and Contentions. We will hear 3 provocations again and see them again by Jan Legali, Douglas Thompson, and John and Vanya. And we will also hear 2 sabotages by Clementine and Eddie Vinani, our fellow MMU member. Thank you, everyone, for tonight. It was a pleasure, and I hope you have a beautiful day or night ahead of you, and hope to see you next time for Muscles.